Hello, fellow humans.
Greetings.
Okay, now that you're here, I just hit the stream. It just reminded me to hit the stream button, like we always do. Hit a little early or late in this case. Yeah, I was just
Yeah,
telling
that's all right.
Brian. I was just telling Brian. Yeah, it's been so long since we've recorded. It actually had logged me out of Streamyard for the first time I think ever. So I had to figure out what that was, but it didn't really take that long.
I know we've been slacking on recording.
That's
Too
right.
much
Same boat
shit
here.
to do. Yeah,
Yep.
there's just too much. Not enough hours in the day and days in the week and months in the
Yep.
year. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's the busiest time of the year for both of us, so I figured that works out really well that we do both do the same thing for a living.
Right.
Right. So neither one of us has time for 9 months out of the year.
Yeah. But this is the same 9 months.
Right.
At least I
Well,
got some tree trimming.
winter's coming, so prepare
Yeah, I
yourselves.
got some tree trimming in. So hopefully get tree trimming and some paver patio work, and I'm trying to make it happen. It's the harder time of year to make it happen, but I'm trying to do that.
Wait,
Nice.
so are we streaming? Yeah.
We just started streaming.
Okay. All right. I dropped links. Brian, you want me to drop a link in your patron Discord or no?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
All right. Let me go. Hold on. Scooby Doo. All right. There we go. Done. So we still want to do libertarian history.
Like Penguin's response. I'd say I'm good with anything, but
I mean, yeah, I mean it's weird because it's not like we can look at current events and just start talking about that because we've been talking about that. So I don't. It's up to you guys.
Well, I think we should, since we said we were going to next time, like 2-3 times in a row.
Libertarian history. I definitely want to do libertarian history. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, let's do that. Well, I got a couple things we should do first. It'll be quick, and then we can do libertarian history. So you want to roll into the intro?
Okay. Sweet.
All right.
All right, let's go. Rock and roll.
All right. Welcome back to Agora Podcast. It's another episode of Into the Void. It's been a while, but it's glad to be back recording. If anybody's been catching up, we've been a little bit absent, but our last episode was our 9th Into the Void, and now I present our 10th Into the Void. So it's kind of a cool little milestone, or it's our 11th actually, but it's our 11th with Brian anyway. But excited to be here. I'm here with Sek Makora and Dr. Brian Sovereign, of course. How's everybody doing today?
Yeah, rocking and rolling. It's Sam Hain these days, I hear. We're getting close.
Speaking of Sam Hain, so the proper pronunciation of that is actually Saween, and I swear to God, if anybody corrects me, I'm gonna look. I refuse to pronounce it that way. I'm not gonna do that. I don't know. It's not out of any kind of disrespect or anything, but I came across the name Sam Hain from Danzig's band in the 80s, and I've always heard everyone pronounce it that way. And apparently the technical way to pronounce that is Saween, and I'm just not going to do that. So for Sam Hain's is better. It sounds cooler anyway. So we're going to go with that.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, let's go with that. Do either of you guys celebrate anything like that? Is there any kind of remembrance of the dead in your spiritual
for me, no.
practices?
No, not at all. But I do. I think it seems to be almost universal these days that October and this time of year is not so. Ignoring that aspect of it, because no, I don't have that per se. But ignoring October and the fall time and the transition of this season in particular, I guess the end of winter and spring. I mean, everybody loves that. You gotta. get tired of the cold weather after a while. But something about autumn and the falling leaves and pumpkins and everything, it's just something that I think people cherish now, even more than when I was like a kid. So no, but I love this time of year for sure.
Yeah, I mean, in Judaism, there's no, Day of the Dead. There's no Halloween, nothing along or a Samhain. Well, I'll keep saying Samhain as well. Yeah, nothing along those lines. In fact, I mean, there's pretty much a halakhic, which halakhic just means legal, as in Talmudic ruling in Judaism, that says, no, Halloween is not halakhic, and if anything, it's even anti-Torah at the end of the day. I don't really have a problem with it, but I mean, I never celebrated it growing up. I watched everybody else celebrate it. Every once in a while, I got to, dress up for when there'd be whatever kind of costume contest or something in school, like elementary school. But yeah, I never did. And even, another kind of interesting point to get into that, and I think I could get into a little bit of perhaps. Well, I'll let Sec speak in a second here, but then maybe I could get into why I don't think there's one in Judaism. But just to put a point on it, when my parents converted to Christianity, they converted to Seventh-day Adventism, and Adventists don't celebrate Halloween either. They did a weird thing though, where they called it Harvest Day, and I think that kind of speaks to Penguin's point, where everybody just kind of enjoys this time of year for, I don't know, if it's because of Thanksgiving, people kind of really consciously or unconsciously gathering together, getting closer to each other, that there's kind of a warm feeling that comes with that.
Yeah, definitely.
And right. And so Adventists would do Harvest Day, and you basically, like, you'd go to the church and you'd kind of do Halloween, but you'd usually dress up as like biblical characters. And of course, what did biblical characters even look like and how did they dress? You're kind of limited as far as that goes. I'd usually choose a Roman soldier, which probably wasn't the best idea, but
Samson.
Yeah, Samson was always an interesting one. I mean, I could go there as the bald one now, but yeah, that wasn't, and there's I think a lot of Christian denominations that also actually a lot of Protestant denominations would actually eschew a lot of holidays, even Christmas. Adventists do still celebrate Christmas, but that's kind of another conversation. I mean, really, Judaism's high holidays, quite a few of them have already passed, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and so on. They usually come around this time as well. And Sukkot is another one of those that really brings people together. So maybe that's why Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism anyway, has never felt a need to have like a Halloween or something along those lines, or even like the, kind of the Adventist bastardization of something called Harvest Day. But anyway, I mean,
I'm just thinking back to my childhood, Brian.
Yeah.
Isn't Sukkot kind of harvest themed to some extent?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, you basically, you go out and you're supposed to like live in tents, more or less. It's a bit of a long story, but it has to do with living in the wilderness and remembering that time, remembering living in the 40 years in the wilderness after leaving Egypt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought that was a harvest tent, because I remember them building the Sukkot or whatever the structure is called. I don't know if it's also called Sukkot, but I remember that when I was a kid. I grew up around a lot of Jews, so we always had that. We always had that in school from all the way through middle school. And I always thought, I mean, I maybe it took a harvest theme where we just because of the setting, and there was a lot of non-Jews. Sure. But we always had a little thing.
Yeah. So, Sec, what do you got with your Samhain? Go ahead.
Well, one quick question. So you weren't allowed to trick or treat, were you?
No, not at all.
So that reminds me. So I grew up in a tiny town, and it reminds me of my friend who his parents were Jehovah's Witness, and he was not allowed to celebrate Halloween in school either.
Yeah, Jehovah's Witness is very similar to Seventh-day Adventists in a lot of ways. Not all, but in a lot. Yeah.
But he was also the only other kid who did not stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. His parents were Jehovah's Witnesses, and mine were weird anti-war pacifist or whatever. So we were the only two weirdos not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. So I mean, kudos to him. But
yeah, goddamn heroes. That's great.
yeah.
I mean that really. Like
No,
that's
it was
amazing
super
for
awkward
kids
as a
to.
kid. I'm not gonna
Well,
lie.
sure.
It was, yeah.
Right.
But
I mean, that's
regardless
impressive
of
for
what your
kids to do
beliefs
that.
are, all your friends are doing it. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I'm not huge on holidays. So I have sort of mixed feelings. Like, when it comes to certain holidays throughout the year, it's like, well, we pick this one day to like hang out with our family and show that our appreciation for one another and what we have and whatever else. It's like I'm just gonna do that mostly whenever it feels right, But there's something about this time of the year. I think the reason there's a lot of like remembrance of the dead and harvest festivals is because it's the end of harvest season and you're going into winter, which is historically like when a lot of people died. So you appreciate what you have, and then you sort of appreciate who you've lost and remember those things. But it's also the only reason I would even I consider celebrating this day. So like my this is our tradition. My wife and I, we both lost our mothers, so we don't have our mothers are no longer here. And so like every October we watch a lot of spooky movies and we have fun with the kids and doing various, dressing up and whatever. And our kids have been wearing different costume every day for the past since the beginning of the month or so. And we just remember like our mothers who aren't here anymore. But we do that all the time. The only thing is like this time of the year is sort of a microcosm for the human life cycle. Like, so, you have the spring, summer, and then the fall, and then going into winter, and then to, sort of be reborn or created again in the spring. And this is sort of, the human life is actually a microcosm for that, cycle of the planet, and that the cycle of the planet is also, a microcosm for possibly the cycles of the universe or whatever. So just doing that at this time of the year, I think it puts you in line with other things cosmically, and then other humans are doing it at the same time, so that has some sort of effect on reality and fucking, I don't know, hippie vibrational things and whatever the thing. So that's would be my only reason for celebrating any holiday whatsoever, is just because it's sort of in line with other cycles of the universe and the earth and stuff. So other than that, I just do my own thing and I celebrate my whatever I want to in my own time when I fucking feel like it, because I'm a weirdo individual harbinger of chaos. So I do what I want when I want. It doesn't matter what traditions exist. But yeah, that's what we do for this time of the year. We'll have probably some fire and an altar to the dead, but that's about it.
Yeah, I think we lived kind of in a traditional, agricultural setting. There wouldn't be any question why have some of these, seasonal holidays that we do. I think there's really a strong urge after the harvest is done and we've still got plenty, and before it's too cold and everything. I think there's probably a natural urge for people that do like the seasonal festivals to have a festival this time. Just like people do May Day, which is a lot less popular and still, unless you're like a communist or whatever. But I think that was probably something people were really into at some time when the seasons were a lot harsher before modern technology, and a lot of stuff was, a lot of our lives were centered around the seasons and the cycles and everything in nature, and coping with the temperature changes and everything else was a lot bigger of a deal. It was what your entire life was basically going to be dedicated to if you live in that kind of climate, it's the European climate, North America, all that. So it's like, I think it really comes pretty natural. You really, the idea of having a Christmas is in a lot of places, it's like just kind of want to stay indoors, which is, I guess, what a lot of times what you do at Christmas time. But yeah, like I said, I think that the whole popularity of October and Halloween to Thanksgiving time and pumpkins and everything, I think I love it. That's just like seems to be something that people are settling on as like their favorite season. And it is one of the good ones. It's nice and temperate, and you get to wear your sweaters and drink hot cocoa and all that stuff.
Yeah, Penguin, is there like any official ruling on Halloween in Islam? Is there, whether
I'm
for
sure
or
it's
against?
totally against. I'm sure. Yeah, for a fact, just because it's not part of our. That's just something I was going to actually say too. I had this thought. So these kind of holidays don't exist in the Islamic tradition at all. For one thing, the lunar calendar doesn't have the same. The months don't line up on the same seasons
Right.
every year. Well, they do. It's 11 years. It's 11 days earlier every year because of it's a true lunar cycle and so forth. So we don't have seasonal holidays. They over the time it shifts all over the solar calendar. So our holidays are just, we have two high holidays. There's a third Christmassy one that has the same kind of tradition of like, yeah, how Christmas was like verboten back in the day too, but there's still people that did it, and we have a third, but I've never celebrated it, and I'll be happy to be super orthodox in that regard because I just don't need another holiday. But it's a kind of the kids' holiday, kind of the gifts to kids holiday, So
Sure.
I don't see anything wrong from that aspect. But anyways, two holidays. They don't end up following on the same part of the year, so it just doesn't work that way. But I can imagine, having a harvest festival or spring festival completely divorced from religion, but there's no religious. I really don't know how that actually works, and I'm sure it's varied throughout history in different places. But those kind of things aren't really tied to our religion. We don't bring things outside of our religion or that predate our religion in most cases into our religion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We don't incorporate the two. There's some things that are just not going to be separate. And frankly, there wasn't going to be a harvest festival in 7th century Arabia anyway, just because of the climate where it is on the equator and everything. And that's kind of cool because it's it could be your religion kind of remains constant everywhere you go. But yeah, it's just like you can celebrate the harvest, but it's just not part of our religion. It's something separate.
Yeah. I think, certainly the point about Arabia is another reason that in Judaism, why there probably isn't exactly something like that. I think another part of it too is, this concept of like the Day of the Dead, of the remembrance of the dead, or even, like with the Day of the Dead, where depending upon your belief system, like the dead are actually coming back for, a night or whatever. I think a big part of that comes down to really in ancient Judaism, you had the idea of Sheol. The afterlife was basically nothingness. It wasn't exactly soul sleep, but it was pretty close to that. And so the idea, I mean, in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, there is the idea of the dead coming back, like Samuel gets called up by the witch of Endor and so on. So it's not that they couldn't. But by and large, like this idea of somehow bringing the dead back isn't really there. And when you get into Kabbalah later on, or more formalized Kabbalah, then it turns into where there's resurrection, and resurrection to the point that it can, like a person, an individual alive at the time could have the spirit of some ancient Jew, inhabit them. And, there's lots of stories where Kabbalists would build entire communities around graveyards, for that sort of thing to happen. But that's a very different thing than an idea that like all of the dead rise again, for a set amount of time. Yeah, so I'm not surprised, that it's not there. The other thing too, with like the idea of a fall or winter festival, I mean, historically you have what's called the Festival of Calends is what they would call it in ancient Rome. But the holiday of Calenda, which really isn't a part of Judaism anymore, which is kind of weird that it's not, because the idea is that Adam was seeing, he thought when in December at the time, what would have been December, winter's happening and all that, he thinks the world is ending because the days are getting so short, and all he can imagine is, oh, this is all over, I'm done, and then and this is an argument for where the idea for Christmas, or the 21st to the 25th, would end up getting prominence, was because of this calends, because it turns into this massive joyous festival where after the 21st, in winter, after the solstice, suddenly Adam realizes that, oh, actually, the days are getting longer again, and it's not the end of the world, and this is all completely natural. And that's sort of an old idea of where perhaps the veneration of the 25th would come from, and really it all comes out of the winter solstice. But yeah, I mean, there's that, and I think that's probably part of also why Judaism doesn't. There aren't. I mean, there's Hanukkah, but the Hanukkah isn't a biblical holiday. Hanukkah is a historical holiday, as in it's came out of an event that happened in history, that being a Jewish civil war. It's not something that's in the Bible at all. So I think part of the reason there's no holidays there for Judaism really has to do with this this ancient idea that Adam was like terrified that, wow, the days are getting shorter, the world is ending, and so there's no point to like real celebration. And honestly, Hanukkah is only a thing, I think, just to take on Christmas now, for Jewish kids. So, I mean, I know it may, arguably
sure.
it has some other meaning, but, and I know the meaning of it, but why does it have any prominence? I really think that that's why. Ultimately, outside of calendar, part of it is, so I'll put in this last bit, in that there are a lot of holidays that I think were part of Judaism that are no longer celebrated. And part of that has to do with the change in the calendar system. So I'm open to that. Maybe thousands of years ago, there could have been some kind of Day of the Dead or some kind of Halloween, concept within Judaism, something along those lines. But I don't think so. But I'm just, admitting that, yes, there are holidays that have been removed, and that some of which we know about, some of which we don't. The other part of it that I'll add in quickly is, in the Talmud, it talks about like these two fires kind of coming out of the mount, one of them is Torah, and the other is considered the book of nature. And I can readily accept, so like I said earlier, where rabbis would say, oh, Halloween is, no, that's anti-halacha, like we shouldn't even bother with it, we shouldn't celebrate it. But that doesn't mean it's wrong, because again, knowledge, wisdom in Judaism comes from these two fires going up into the heavens. And the other fire, like I said, one's Torah, the other fire is actually really just paganism. It's the book of nature. And so, pagan holidays, I think, have just as much validity within Judaism as anything that comes from Torah. Sek, what do you got?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think Hanukkah is so popular just so Jewish kids get gifts too. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all it is.
Yeah. I mean,
I agree.
I mean, fine. I mean, that's the only reason we even celebrate Christmas around here at all, is just because, the smile on the kid's face when they open a gift they really wanted.
Yeah.
It makes me happy. So that's enough of a reason for us to celebrate some sort of, secular Christmas or whatever,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So that we have fun. And also, it's back to like, decorating a Christmas tree is fun, making cookies or whatever the thing, having hot cocoa when it's cold outside, and, kids opening gifts. That's all fun. So I don't need any
100%.
other reason than that. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So yeah, that's where I'm at. Oh, also, oh shit, I had a point and now I forgot. Oh, I'm going to convert to Judaism. And why am I going to convert to Judaism? Well, come on.
Why is that?
Well, I'm supposed to set somebody up for the jokes, for the jokes. It's the old Jewish comedian.
Oh, that's
thing.
right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
I'm just here for the jokes. Yes.
right,
yeah,
right.
that's
No, but there's been a lot going around about a Jewish space laser recently, and Brian, have you been holding out on me? Like,
man,
where do I get the Jewish space laser? Do I got to convert, or you know, like?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't have it upstairs here in my office. Downstairs, I have a water bottle that I take to the gym with me, and I have a patch on there that says member of the Jewish Space Laser Corps. And yeah, there's I just learned, I think it came out last month. It came out September 2023. Michael Rothschild, don't worry about the name, but Michael Rothschild, the author, came out with a book that's all about the conspiracy theory. Really, it's about the Rothschild family in general. But the title of the book is like the Jewish Space Laser, and it's all about how that ended up becoming a conspiratorial meme, shall we say? Really,
so a guy named Rothschild says, "Oh no, there's nothing to worry about with the Rothschilds." Yeah, okay.
I just got the book on Audible. I haven't read it, and honestly, there's a good chance Michael Rothschild isn't even a Rothschild, or isn't like that kind of a Rothschild.
There's another writer named Rothschild, and he's like no relation either.
Right.
I think he's he might be a science fiction writer or some kind of fiction writer. But yeah, named Rothschild, and I'm like, but no relation. There's a lot of that. Yeah. Well, to wrap up the Halloween thing, this will probably come out long after Halloween, but I hope everybody had a safe and fun whatever celebration you do or don't this time of the year. And for any of the necromancers out there, just remember that sometimes dead is better. So sorry. I love this time of the year, if no other reason, just it's an excuse to watch a lot of scary movies, which I love. So I mean,
what, real quick comment on that with horror movies. In fact, Mrs. Sovereign and I are going to be talking about this on an upcoming episode. There's an evolutionary argument for watching horror films that it's actually a very good thing. It can even be, I mean, you want to be careful which ones, but it can even be helpful for like young people, and the idea is, I was shocked by it, and I'll just mention it here. I was kind of surprised by the argument, but it reminds me very much of why it's mentally healthy to watch science fiction, because science fiction it gives you a path to process the rapid changes that occur in our present civilization, technological changes, everything else, because everything happens so fast. We can't really take the time to figure out, okay, where can all of this go? Science fiction can actually collate all that and give us some kind of a response so that our brain can do something with the information. I even call it on my show, I call it the science fiction method. But horror movies can actually do a very similar thing where we don't, especially today, maybe even more important. I think it might explain why horror is so popular, more so than it's ever been, even because horror movies will show you the extreme possibilities of existence and the dangerous possibilities of existence, things that we normally don't experience, and certainly most people don't experience anymore, in our modern world. And so watching horror movies can actually help your brain, kind of like how science fiction can make sense of all the changes and information happening and all the new technology and everything. Horror can actually help you make sense of the terrifying aspects of the world and about survival and all these other things. So actually, watching horror movies, very good thing to do. But go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, it takes you out of your comfort zone,
Totally.
And it thinks about not just what is, but what could be, and what is possible. And also that all this could come crashing down at any moment. So, things are kind of temporary, and it makes you, it's also sort of an allegory for all parts of the human condition. I think that's a lot of, at least what monster movies are. It's sort of an allegory for what humans can be capable of. But my daughter, she was just watching Godzilla and Kong, which is not a horror movie, but it's it's a monster movie.
It's a monster film.
Yeah. Which is what horror started as, was just like monster movies. And she loves two things that she usually loves. She likes Spider-Man. She's barely, not even 3 yet, so she's gonna be 3. She likes Spider-Man, Godzilla versus Kong, which I was just watching the other day with her, and she's loved Stargate since she was an infant. So
right on.
She's got a head start on all of you.
That's healthy. I love it.
Yeah.
It's so great. Yeah, I mean, just another quick comment on that.
Hmm.
I think that, because I know we got some great subjects we want to get into. Um, I think overall, another reason, and this gets into superhero films as well. I think it's not a surprise to me that come, the beginning of the 21st century, when everything is becoming so, shall we say, scientific, more so than it's ever been, supernatural getting explained away all the time, all these fantastical things that I think we kind of deep down realize are a part of our existence. But we keep getting told it's not possible, or we keep getting told that that's not real, or whatever. I think that we find ourselves having to express these things that we know actually are very real, and we do so through our entertainment. And I think it's also why a lot of people will, another reason that people will go to horror movies, go to superhero films, because it's the only place where they can go where it's safe to explore these aspects of the human condition. um, and and that I mean, that's another thing. And really, again, it's a pushback against the scientific materialism of the day. But anyway, that's what I got.
Yeah, I think this is really close to this is almost just a point of redundancy, but like, yeah, I think we have a natural tendency to want to look at like, you know, gore or horror or something like that, danger, predators, which could be like a Michael Myers character or Jason or something like that,
Yeah.
like a predator of the bipedal sort, because I do think it's like basically like an what you call an evolutionary or instinctive mechanism, because we want to know about the danger. That's why people want to look at so much crime stuff about serial killers, stuff like that. People are fascinated. I think a lot of that is because I think there's other things too, maybe, but like there's a need to want to like take in this information just because it's a danger, or our mind says it's a danger, even if it's like something that's actually in real life very uncommon. We want to know about what the danger is to our mortality.
Yeah, totally. What else we got, Sec?
All right, I got one. Okay? So I got one quick question from our questions for the host channel in our listener Discord, and this will be real quick, and then we can move on to other less important things. Just kidding. Okay, so this is a fun one, and it should be quick. If you could only listen to one or the other for the rest of your life, would it be punk or metal? I'll let you guys answer this one first.
All right, I guess I'm the one that's going.
Go for it.
Jeez. All right, I respect the hell out of punk, and there's a lot of like metal that wouldn't exist without punk. So and there's like even pop artists that would have never come into fruition without punk. Like, I mean, I can't imagine my life without Billy Idol. And I mean that quite seriously. Like, that guy is so ridiculously talented. It hurts and you feel it through the speakers. But at the same time, I've always we've brought this up in the past. Like, metal is, it's the thing that can encapsulate all music. Though, admittedly, anytime it gets into like, I don't know, Linkin Park or Hollywood Undead or something like that, where there's like bringing in what could be argued as punk aspects or even like hip hop aspects, like I don't really care for that myself. That's not my bag. So I mean, I would have to say metal. Like, that's really what it comes down to, because it can encapsulate all other forms of music. And I also think that a lot of metalheads before metal existed would have been classical fans because of the complexity of the music. And the complexity of the music really does not that there's anything wrong with simple music. I mean, my favorite band is Kiss, and that's about as simple as it gets. But the complexity of music certainly does a lot of gives me some nice fuzzies in my brain. So there we go.
Penguin, you got anything on that?
Yeah, I'm not a huge music listener these days, but I'm pretty familiar with like a wide variety of music for sure. I would never limit myself. Well, but the question, but I would normally never limit myself to like a certain type of music. But so I've never been. I have listened to metal for brief stages of my life. Some little bit of metal. Certainly not a metalhead. Don't know really anything. You're talking about the history of the technical details. I know some of the bands. But that being said, like Brian's right. Punk, I mean, it's not really what the question is, it's what you can listen to. But punk has been so influential to a lot of things. I've never really been into punk per se, but it's so influential in so many just music in general, popular music in different forms over the years, for everything from like its origins to its influence on pop and like I said, metal and hip hop, like all like even its genesis in some of the same places. I don't know. Punk is just culturally so influential. I know the question really isn't which one would you like have erased from history or anything like that, but I think it's worth pointing out um, that if the question was something more along those lines, like would you want to have a music playlist that is free from punk influences? That'd be really tough.
Well said. My answer is probably like a slightly different variation of Brian's. Um, I love both punk and metal, but I think I actually love punk more for for one, it was my first love. Um, eh, I might not be here if it weren't for punk rock, for a lot of different reasons. But I would actually have to for this question, I would actually have to choose metal mainly because it just gives me a lot more options. There's a lot of my love of or the bands I like from punk are from like the late 70s, early 80s. And it's not to say I don't like some new punk. There's a lot of new punk I like. Um, but there's a ton more new metal that I like. And there's so many different kinds of metal that I could listen to it for the rest of my life and not get bored. Whereas I think I would kind of run out of new stuff to listen to if I chose punk. So that I love punk a little bit more, but I would actually choose metal just for sort of more options. Because like Brian said, it can incorporate so many other different kinds of music in it. I could be listening to Finnish polka metal one day and thrash metal the next and death metal the next day after that. And you would never run out of stuff to listen to forever. So,
Yeah, you got to
I would choose
answer the
metal.
question literally, because I think we all agree that like punk is super important and
Yeah,
and was in its day. Like, just I think it's very if you don't really know the history and where this music started and what kind of venues and just the time period, it's very easy to underrate the importance of punk when it came out.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those questions where I don't, in this one, like either answer is right. Like there isn't a wrong answer. It's not like, would you rather listen to metal or country? In that instance, there's a wrong answer, and that wrong answer is country. But uh, I, people can come after me. That's fine. But it's a CIA creation anyway. So, okay. But yeah, there's no wrong answer. Like punk or metal. I mean, you're going to have a great time the rest of your life. I think either way.
for sure. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
All right. So libertarian history. I've been thinking
Woo.
about this since the last time we talked. And now we can go down this road you guys can go down this road with me if you want to, or we can go on to something else. But I've been having trouble trying to decide where do you begin with libertarian history. So let me lay something out for you guys and I'll see what you guys think. So I started thinking, well, you can go back to the Christian use of the word libertarian, which were, sort of proponents of free will. You can start with, sort of de Jacques who used the term libertarian. A lot of folks will go further back to sort of like this is what I see the progression of libertarian thought as, but the levelers and the diggers in the English Civil War, which were essentially different variations of classical liberalism, or proto-classical liberalism. Excuse me. But some folks will rightly go further back than that and sort of cite Lao Tzu or Diogenes from Greek philosophy, and Lao Tzu from the Tao Te Ching. And I would agree with those as well. But what I would posit is that there isn't a beginning to libertarian thought. This might be something that goes back since humans have existed, maybe before that. It's a dichotomy I see in humans throughout history and prehistory, um and I mentioned this to Brian. We were talking. Brian got too curious because I said I had a little twist on the libertarian theory, and he texted me. He's like, so what is it? And
Yeah,
I
you said
gave-
you had
I
a surprise, and I'm like, oh no. Jews don't do surprises.
So I would say that in some sense, if there is actually a beginning, it might even start in Sumer or Babylon with the myth of Marduk. Okay, so I've heard this name pronounced several different ways. It's either Mardu, Marduk, Marduk. I'm not sure what the proper pronunciation of that word is, but we'll call it Marduk for the sake of this, or Marduk. And his battle with Tiamat. And I would say that libertarians are actually descendants of, or are represented by the archetype of Tiamat. So what is everybody following me still? Marduk,
yeah.
Marduk is the god of order, of rule, of civilization, of I would say even conformity. He brought order to the universe, and Tiamat was the goddess, the mother goddess, number one. But so you have sort of the paternalism versus maternalism thing going here too. But she was the goddess of chaos and creation and the wild and the ocean and all of these things that I think are best represent that side of humanity, which sort of yearns for freedom and the whimsical and silliness and the wild and the sort of the absence of imposed order. And I think in some sense that libertarian that I won't say it's the beginning, but that is the best sort of description of these two archetypes or personifications of these archetypes of the dichotomy which exists in humanity. There's always going to be those that yearn for order, and there are those that yearn for sort of freedom and chaos in the wild. And I mean chaos in the best possible sense. I don't mean like murder and violence and death and whatever. And I just mean like just being spontaneous and free and free flowing and left alone and all of these things. So I think that and honestly, there's some bleed over from Sumer, obviously, because Marduk is the son of your boy there, Brian, Enki. Mm-hmm. And so there's obviously, this goes back to Sumer as well. And it might go back forever. This might be a description of this sort of the dawn of civilization, which was to impose, order, law, rule over humanity. So I don't think there is a beginning to libertarian thought. I think we're just the descendants of this long lineage that goes back probably before time itself. So does anyone have a disagreement with that?
I don't know if I disagree. I mean, I think, yes, I absolutely think libertarianism has always been a part of it, because I think everybody's, I'll just stick with half the equation. I think everybody's born an anarchist, right? Which is libertarian can mean a lot of different things, the original users of the term libertarians were communists, right? But regardless, using we'll say the myth for this conversation, the myth of Marduk and Tiamat, that gets used for a lot of different things. It's not uninteresting. One of the popular, and I think this falls, it's not a direct correlation with what you're saying, Sec, but it falls in line with your kind of your abstract thinking on this, in that a lot of people think that the end of Tiamat, the death of Tiamat, by Marduk, was actually Tiamat represented the matriarchy that was destroyed by the patriarchy thousands of years ago. That's a very popular anthropological explanation of what, and I know people want to bristle at patriarchy and matriarchy, but that's a very, very popular anthropological explanation.
That's sort of Crowley's argument as well, that we started in more of a matriarchal era of man, and then we moved into the patriarchal, and now we're in the age of the man child right now, and then we're going to go back to some sort of matriarchal society. But yes, yeah.
I mean, and it's it's an anthropological analysis that makes sense, because how do we often do anthropology when we look at these ancient myths? Is we will often look at modern, say, hunter-gatherers, okay? And a lot of them, believe it or not, and most people don't realize this, but a lot of them are matriarchal. Even ones that are societally, shall we say, socially advanced. You think of like the Haudenosaunee, or more popularly known as the Iroquois. The Iroquois were matriarchal. But these are people who lived the same way for so long, for thousands of years. So the idea that that somehow Tiamat is representative of the matriarchy, it's not an unfair analysis to make. I don't think, I'm going to give you credit here, Sek, because I don't think I've ever heard, and I don't say this because it's a bad idea, I say it's because it's a very interesting one. I don't think I've ever heard anybody like try to say that, the battle, the mythological battle between Marduk and Tiamat is actually representative of, it is order and chaos, yes, but that it's actually representative of the battle between, top-down authoritarianism versus, shall we say, in this case, libertarianism. That's a pretty fascinating explanation. Certainly, you mentioned Enki and my boy, that being Zecharia Sitchin. Zecharia Sitchin's explanation of that myth was that Tiamat was actually a planet that existed within our solar system, and that made contact, with another planetary body, and that ended up creating the prime asteroid belt that exists, between Mars and the rest of the solar system, going back, and that those remains are what Tiamat was. So his explanation wasn't so much that it was some kind of ideological battle, but that it was actually an astronomical event, that occurred. I've never, it's an interesting idea, and it gets into kind of like Immanuel Velikovsky's work and all that. And I've never been totally sold on it, admittedly. But that's getting into a completely different conversation. My point is just that this is a really fascinating, analysis of that. Going back to Sumer, I'm just going to add on to the historical context very quickly, in that it's very, for me, a central part of what I considered libertarianism when I definitely waved that, shall we say, that ideological flag a lot more. Hedonism was an essential part of that. Now, hedonism you can absolutely trace all the way back to Sumer. And I would argue, and have argued in the past, that hedonism is like the first philosophy, because it comes down to the simple, some of our oldest writings from Sumer, which we know they're actually quoting even older writings that probably go back to the time before Uruk, which is the first city, where it would say, eat, drink, and be merry. Now, we all say that. It's a cultural meme. Like, everybody knows that. But nobody realizes that's one of the oldest fucking things we know that humans ever said. And I think eat, drink, and be merry, and the, kind of what you can extrapolate from what that means is it's hedonism. But then at the same time, and I would argue that's ultimately libertarianism. So I think all of this is a long-winded way of saying, Sek, you bringing it all the way back to that, at least, I think is fair.
Penguin, you got a disagreement or anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, I would say that when I think of libertarianism, I think of something way more constrained than like taking it back before, say, like you read, the 19th century stuff, and then you go to the proto stuff, the proto libertarianism, all the way back to like the English Civil War and stuff, which is stuff I've been dying to talk with you about for a long time. But I see no problem looking at like what the influences are of that through history and in the human condition. I would actually call like some of the things you're talking about kind of, I almost wouldn't even use the word libertarianism, as I just associate that with just modern thought. I think of it as like what you were describing in the Sumerian context with the myth and everything, which is always supposed to be allegorical with how they actually really did see the world and the cosmos. I would call that just the anarchic. I think of libertarianism as more something really closely associated with a modern, I mean in the past like 400 years, a modern liberalism, and that being more of the anarchic. I don't want to, not anarchist. I mean, we're talking about something that some guy wrote down at a certain point, Proudhon and onwards, but like the anarchic principle versus order, and that's just, I don't even know a word for that. We could call it libertarianism, we can call it proto, but you really wouldn't call it proto liberalism. It's just the anarchic principle versus, I don't even want to say order, because order is sometimes used when you talk about order out of,
well, I think you're talking about more like formalized libertarianism, right? Like a more
and I don't want to use the word libertarianism. I would say it's you're talking all about the anarchic principle that I think is bigger than just libertarianism.
Yes.
It's sort of leisure and disorder, but
doing what makes you
happy. It could also be spontaneous order. Yeah. It's all of that stuff. It's really broad versus the other really broad. It's very much like a yin and yang type of deal, a dualism. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I don't even know exactly what the word is for that.
Well, so this is sort of the problem I faced when I've been thinking about the history of libertarianism. Is I'm like, well, when do you start? And so since we recorded last, I've been thinking about this sort of off and on, and I'm like, when do you start? So do you start when people started using the word libertarian? Do you know what I mean? And so even like, classical liberals or even modern libertarians will at least point back to Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu never, Rothbard did multiple times. He called him the first anarchist. So Lao Tzu never used the term libertarian or anarchist, but, so yes, in the early 17th century, you have, people sort of developing thoughts, writings, and theories around these sort of, I don't know, impulses, personality traits, values. They start developing theories and terms to describe these things. But really, these were something that were part of humanity forever, is kind of the argument I'm making. It's just that in sort of the proto-enlightenment and enlightenment era, people had more fucking time to sit down and write long diatribes about these things. But they were describing and theorizing about things that have always existed throughout humanity. It's, yes, that anarchic impulse, or, hedonist impulse, or just like you said, eat, drink, and be merry. That's just another way of saying, there's a meme that goes around a lot. It's a saying. It's like, humans take seriously what the gods made for fun. And it's just that, life is short. It's too short to not do things that make you happy, to do what you want and to be free.
Right.
And that impulse has existed throughout humanity. There's people that want that, and there's people that want imposed order. And that's the dichotomy throughout human history. And we just sit on that other side, the not the guardians of order, whatever that other side is. And it's been called libertarianism rightly for the last 400 years. But before that, it was just other things. There wasn't a term necessarily for it. It was sort of a collection of various values, and hedonism is certainly another description, but it's more than just that. It's a lot of it's a lot of things. It's hard to pick a starting point on libertarian history is, I guess, the point of all of this, really, because I think it's, I don't know if we're born anarchist, maybe, but it's certainly there have been people that I would call anarchist all throughout human history, or at least had those impulses.
Yeah.
I think one place. Go ahead.
So I'll just say, I'll inject this. Yeah, I mean, the idea of being, born anarchist, actually, the whole phrase is being born anarchist and atheist, because a baby has no concept of God, authority, or anything along, like, it just doesn't know, and it doesn't care, and which is great, right? It's like they're like cats. It's awesome. But but so that's what I mean by that, is that again, that the concept's just not there. But then, maybe some people would argue that unconsciously it is there, like it's just signals that it's picking up that it can't really formalize into words. But I think you're raising a really great point, Zach, in that, this is the same, speaking of atheists, this is the same thing with atheism. Like, people think atheism is a modern thing, or its popularity anyway is modern, or that it started with Voltaire, which is just not even remotely true. There have been fantastic books even in the past decade that talk about how actually in ancient Rome, most people were atheists. They did not belong to the imperial cult or the cult of Saturn, or, all these different things. Most people throughout history have actually been atheists. And if you just have to look at the texts themselves. The problem is that the victors, usually the cults, would, had most of the writing. So we just assume that most people weren't atheists, but that's not true at all. So, to call out and say, okay, yeah, we didn't have a term for it until now, but it's always been there, I think is an important point to bring up, because I think there are people who would argue against libertarianism, saying this is only a philosophy that exists upon the largesse of civilization, which isn't true. And certainly you could go back to Max Stirner, and I think that would debunk the whole idea. But regardless, I think it's something worth bringing up. And the other thing I'll bring up quickly is that when we say I'll assume but when hedonism said, we're not talking about just like getting trashed and doing a bunch of drugs and everything else. We're talking about ethical hedonism, which is a genuine historical philosophy. Why don't you know a lot about it? Well, it's because the hedonists weren't the victors and all their books got burned. But regardless, it is a genuine philosophical school that, gets recognized. Go ahead, Penguin.
Yeah, I'm not actually familiar with that school or anything, and in the term, the use of the term. I definitely wouldn't associate myself with hedonism. And also, I've always considered libertarianism and anarchism as two completely different concepts. And then I would always use the word libertarian anarchist to describe that. The center, the overlap portion of the Venn diagram. And I think that's a certain kind of group of people that we've all, been or had interactions with and read and stuff like that. But I think, obviously you can be one and not the other for sure. Most people of either have not been in that middle portion, like the typical Venn diagram looks like, where it's got a fairly small portion of it overlaps. And yeah, I almost like to use the word anarchic, if not anarchist, to describe that kind of disorder, the kind of spontaneous order aspect, which is really important. And that's why the development of a libertarian anarchism was so important, because it's that anarchist principle that is what I see. It's the anarchist principle that motivates the spontaneous order, or the lack of opposed order, or the bottom up order, or the market driven order. And
or go ahead, Penguin.
When we use the word market, we use it very broadly, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a pretty key thing, is to define, like, what is libertarianism? When we say that, what do we mean? And I agree with you, Penguin. I think regardless of what I think of the definition of libertarianism, there are lots of people who are what we would call statists, people who want government, that consider themselves libertarians, and the Libertarian Party are not, I know there's anarchists involved, or people who call themselves that, but that's inherently not an anarchistic institution, right? It's something that is working within the government, which is, inherently not anarchist. So though that, even that gets squishy, right? Because the what equated to a constitution for the Soviet Union expressly said that the purpose of the Kremlin, the purpose of the Soviet Union was to eventually dissolve all forms of government and become an anarchist civilization. Like that's exactly what it said. Which is why I've always made a little bit of a slow clap for the Soviet Union. Again, what equated to a constitution for them, because it was saying no. Eventually, we need to become stateless. But that's not something the Libertarian Party is, as I understand it anyway, is going for. So yeah, and this would be a major argument between in the early days of what I would call online libertarianism. One of the major kind of the major back and forths that were happening on Facebook all the time was it was minarchists versus anarchists, right? Minarchists being minimum state and anarchists being no state. And they both called themselves libertarians, but like, okay, who's the true libertarians? And that, arguing for who is the true libertarian is as much a key aspect of the history of libertarianism, I think, than any of its ideas, even though it comes down to the ideas ultimately. But that has colored libertarian history from Rothbard before it was even online. You had Rothbard and Samuel Konkin arguing back and forth about these things, right? So anyway, yeah, I think defining libertarianism would be a pretty helpful thing here if we want to even try that. and I'm not saying I'm up to the task. What do you got, Zach?
I'm definitely, I think for the purpose of this conversation, we should probably try to define libertarianism. However, I am also for, even though I use it quite a bit, I'm for letting the term go and letting it die. And whoever wants to take up that term can have it. And I have no interest in trying to revitalize the word libertarianism if that's the way it goes. I will use a different word because, just an old trope. Glenn Beck calls himself a libertarian. So if that, like I have no interest in being associated with that term if that's what it's being used to describe. You know what I mean? So I have no ties to the term libertarian. It's often associated with sort of what Konkin would call partyarchy and the Kochtopus and Ayn Rand and whoever the hell else. And
but there are even wider concentric circles outside of that. There's all sorts of uses of the term, and some of them are just blatantly unrelated, because people see liberty in the term, libertas, liberty.
Roderick Long rightly cites Ayn Rand in using the term anti-concept, and Roderick Long uses that too. Yeah, he gets that from Ayn Rand. So you might call Roderick Long like one of the few left Randians or whatever the thing, but or left Aristotelian, whatever. But anyway, he makes the term about capitalism, socialism, that these terms are anti-concepts in the sense that they obscure more than they enlighten. They're so amorphous and ambiguous. The term itself does not suit discourse or trying to reach consensus.
Disambiguate. It creates more ambiguity than it often has many contradictory definitions. Different people, because we're talking about different people here, and even within the same person necessarily, that they'll have different contradictory meanings and connotations. And so it actually, when you get multiple people doing discourse, is what discourse generally is. When you get multiple people involved, it actually creates the use of the term. Actually, I've thought about this a lot, because I actually have a longer list of anti-concepts now. Most of these labels, in fact, but it leaves you. I guess the definition in my mind is it leaves you with more ambiguity for using this term versus less.
Yes. And I think this might be true for the term libertarian as well. So I will attempt.
And I think that's true of a lot of words too. I think that's true of most of these. Honestly, most of the big labels. Libertarianism, but capitalism was always the big one. Socialism,
yes.
Conservative or conservatism, and liberalism. I mean, what the hell do you know that someone means by that? When they use one of those terms, what on earth do you think out of context do you think that means? You know what I mean? It could be, it's like it could be literally almost anything.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. I agree. But I guess for the purpose of this conversation, we can kind of agree on a loose definition. And maybe it might be helpful to go back a little bit and sort of explore the term libertarian, which, if I understand and remember correctly, it started off as a sort of Christian philosophy, and that it was those that valued free will or believed in free will over determinism. So that's where the term started. It was later used by Jacques, who was an early anarcho-communist, and it was just used as a synonym for anarchism, essentially. I think later it sort of started to develop into libertarian would describe a person that wanted to maximize human agency and freedom. And I think that's a decent working definition if you guys kind of all agree with that. So libertarianism is those who wish to increase personal freedom and agency, and I would say reject or want to reduce authority or external authority. Does anybody
Yeah, I think
disagree?
I liked it until you mentioned authority, and then I think the authority is a confusing concept. But you just said external.
Okay, we can drop authority.
It's like it's like even but no, I like that you added the extra word onto authority, because then it's like, what is authority? And I actually like the first part of the definition as a standalone.
Yeah, it's almost like words are a fuck and they're all made up. It's really hard.
It's like they're all symbols or something, which they are.
Exactly right. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I like the idea of basically, it's maximizing autonomy. Like that, which I think is a succinct way of what you laid out there, and I would agree with that definition, because none of that is saying no gods, no masters. So it is still separating it ultimately from anarchism, and I think saying that it's maximizing autonomy also plays well into Ayn Rand's argument against anarchism, which her argument was always that, well, if you don't have, the state should just exist for defense. And if you don't have defense, the first warlord that comes along is going to take all your freedoms away from you. And so, because I think there are lots of libertarians who would argue for, government, kind of like Ayn Rand, where they would argue for, we need this defense structure or something like that. Now, I don't want to add that into the definition, but just that in the interest of maximizing autonomy, you may want that. So yeah, that definition flies with me. What you said, Sek.
Okay. So would anybody, if going back to libertarian history, where, according to that definition of libertarian, where would you sort of start the modern theory of libertarianism, or beliefs and theories that arise around that basic principle?
So I'm fine with just having an arbitrary starting point.
Sure.
I guess again, it's what we wanted to talk about.
We can go back to Marduk again, but we can let's go through all human history. But we have to start
based
somewhere.
on who I'm. Basically who I'm listening to, like nowadays, who I'm kind of interested in nowadays. I would say just arbitrarily saying Locke. Well, I'm not like an expert on or anything, but if you want to go back and talk about the broad view, now so I could say I want to know about libertarian history starting in with Rothbard in 1952 or whatever, or just with Rothbard generally, and you're talking about a certain kind of American modern libertarianism, and even then, like a lot of for several decades, you're not really, you could skip several decades and just talk about stuff that's a little more, for the most part, relevant to what's going on now. But if you're talking about just the whole philosophy as it's kind of like followed in by the people that kind of use the term or that have the term apply to them in modern times, I would say probably I'm happy with it being Locke. That wouldn't be the answer for everybody, but I'm cool with just putting it out there and saying that. And then from what I know of Locke, I think he's a pretty interesting guy. Don't have any problem with him.
Brian, you got an arbitrary starting point that's entirely made up?
I mean, I honestly, I'd probably, and it's entirely made up, because like, even though we have our very simplified definition of what libertarianism is, I think I still attach so many different ideas to it, so many different abstracts that aren't even ones that I agree with, that aren't even mine, libertarians I know, were such a big part of. I mean, a part of me wants to start with Mises. I know that's very recent. I mean, my first thought was like Menger, was Carl Menger, but yeah, I mean, a part of me went with Mises, and I mean, I think one of the best. We can start with Locke. That's fine, because I think that's interesting as well. But admittedly, I don't think we have to recognize the second highest selling book in the United States, which I do think libertarianism is very much tied with the United States, the libertarianism that we would talk about. I mean, having a lot of European friends, most of them they all complain like, no, we don't have any ideas like this here. Even though some of like Bastiat and some others, weren't exactly American.
I would say the Anglo world, but yes.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
But because I mean, even in Britain,
I think in modern times we've gotten to a point. No, historically, yes, but I think in modern times we've really found ourselves as being really the only bastion of these kind of ideas. From what I understand, they just really do not exist. Even elsewhere in the Anglo world, we know they come from there, and we know there are cousins, there are ideological cousins there. But yeah, I don't think that the way we think about it as Americans, all three of us are from the United States, I don't think that there's a real analog without somebody who's borrowing heavily from American thought, just kind of American point of view.
Yeah, even in the United Kingdom, I mean, like, it's just not there. I mean, yes, there are, libertarians, anarchists, whatever there, but like, this concept of a very popular libertarianism, kind of a formalized libertarianism, it's not there. But I was going to say, the second best-selling book in American history, next to the Bible, is Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. So for me, kind of if I were, really to start at a point that had like meaning to some degree to people today, I think it would really sort of start with her, and that's where Rothbard comes in. I would talk about Rand way before I talk about Rothbard. And so I'm
Rand
open to
was
whatever you
certainly
guys
more
think.
influential.
Yeah, more influential.
Oh,
yeah.
Rand was certainly more influential than Rothbard.
Yeah.
I mean, overall.
Right.
I really liked, I was huge into Rand when I was, 13, 14, 15. I loved Atlas Shrugged at the time. The more I heard Rand talk, the less I liked her, because it turns out so when you read Atlas Shrugged, you picture yourself or the little guy as, God damn it, what's the main protagonist? The guy that owns the steel company.
Oh, Hank Reardon?
Reardon,
yeah.
So you picture yourself as like, not yourself, but you picture the little guy when you're reading her thing. This guy that hustles and innovates and builds himself up and gets there. But it turns out, no, she's just talking about like the Rockefellers and the fucking Carnegies.
Yeah.
Who are bastards and products of the state. Do you know what I mean? Like, so,
right.
I have no love for the robber barons, she's talking about the people that I've despised this whole time. She's about somebody some nerd who started Microsoft in his garage, but that's not who she's talking about. She's talking about titans of industry who are, because they are there, they deserve to be there. And she ignores all of the state intervention that allowed these robber barons to sit so pretty, so
I think
that was my departure from Rand. Is I much prefer it's the Rothbard and Konkin split. I much prefer the entrepreneur over the capitalist. That's the way I've always been. I've just not I just had different terms for these things throughout my life,
Yeah,
but I understand that she doesn't care about I just want to really quickly just say I don't think she cares about that distinction. I don't think she cares about the state intervention and all that stuff that we've talked about in the past on this podcast. It's like that's really not. It's their role in society is really important in her worldview, irrespective of kind of the the state intervention, the rent seeking, and all of that other stuff. And that's like supremely important to me. But then that's why between myself and Rand, we're pretty much in pretty different philosophical bents, regardless of the self-interest thing. I think just reducing Ayn Rand to self-interest alone makes her seem really interesting. It's just when you get to like there are other philosophical differences there, where it's like there are plenty of other people that I can go to for inspiration than Ayn Rand. But I guess there's some novelty with her being a fiction writer and what she was, her milieu back in the, what was it, the 70s, 60s, whenever she was big. It's I think that's I think she's definitely, and I think I increasingly, as I got into a lot of podcasts and stuff, I really do think that she's, at this point, we're finally coming around to the fact that she's really overrated.
She's overrated. You're totally right. And I don't agree with 90% of what she has to say. I would make the statement, and then we can get started from wherever we want to start. I'm fine with anywhere.
We're still trying to find a beginning.
Well, that's part of the journey.
Yeah.
History of
Look,
this is going to be a multi-part. This is going to be a multi-part thing.
Yeah, I think it is.
What's funny is that we can define it. We don't have to like come out with one answer. Like the way we define it is the way we define what our conversation is going to be. But I think this is also really important. A couple of things on that in that regard. Like I was thinking when I was thinking about libertarian history, I was really thinking about like the American post-war libertarianism. I was thinking about at the earliest, like maybe the 50s. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about, and in some respects, we were talking about the online world. So we were really talking about like post Y2K.
Yeah.
It depends on it depends on which conversation we had about like what we were talking about libertarian history. When we were talking about, for example, the experience, like Brian, your experience in those circles and everything. But yeah, I mean, where you define that is sort of where you define the conversation. So I mean, we don't have to have one answer, but
so we can make this a two-parter or.
Yeah, totally.
Multiple parter.
But I definitely want to talk about the English Civil War, because I've been trying to get you to talk about the English Civil War for a while.
Yes.
To be honest with you.
So I think if you're going back to Locke, you have to go back to the English Civil War, because I think that's even where Locke's ideas and the what we call classical liberalism now, that started with the levelers and the diggers in the English Civil War. So I think so that how do I shorten this? This was the time of monarchy and aristocracy, and what would later be called liberalism started, I think, with these, at least in the modern sense, started with these two radical groups, the diggers and the levelers, and the diggers of the levelers, essentially the things that those two groups held in common were they wanted, universal suffrage, civil rights, an abolition of the aristocracy. They wanted more direct democracy. They both opposed absentee ownership, and they differed on property. That's why the diggers left the levelers. Is the diggers wanted, they would probably be the forefathers of like the Jacques. They wanted, or Henry George or something. They wanted land held in common, whereas the levelers sort of they actually varied quite a bit on what they thought about property. They were against sort of land title and absentee ownership and aristocracy, but they both the levelers varied a bit from sort of individual ownership of property to what might be called like mutualism now, or even like more Lockean individual ownership of property. But some of them
For
wanted
quick
to.
context, so we're
Sure.
talking like we're talking like mid 17th century, right? Like that English Civil War.
Yes, yeah, that
Yeah.
English
Okay.
Civil War. Like many,
Got it.
many of them actually fought in Cromwell's. What was it, the New Model Army? They fought and then mutinied later on. So that's the time period. We're it's a period that's the this is where sort of capitalism arises out of later on, because the aristocracy is just dying all throughout Europe, even, but more true in sort of England and Scotland, and you had the Scottish Enlightenment later on. Um, the people that were in these radical groups were what you would call uh, petite bourgeois. They were not workers. They were sort of skilled tradesmen. They were solid middle class. That's where these ideas sort of come out of. And this, I think, led to the British and Scottish Enlightenment later on. So that's where Locke comes from. Is like these are the I would say even the forerunners of Locke, because Locke is born during this time, and so this is where I think at least the modern libertarian tradition starts, is the death of the aristocracy and landed title, and the birth
Yes.
of these two different but very similar strains of radical thought that come out of the English Civil War, the Diggers and the Levelers. And I think you can still see their descendants all throughout the Enlightenment period, and probably up in through American history and through till today. We've all met Georgists and communists and ancoms and whatever online, and then you sort of meet the hardcore Lockeans, and these are the Diggers and the Levelers.
Yeah,
to some
it's good
degree.
to look at this. It's good to look at this in context too. I mean, we're talking about what's called early modernity. But when we say early modernity, I mean we're still talking way back. We're talking about, like you said, the death of the aristocracy, the death of the nobility, the landed titles, and everything. So we're talking about a very different world, a world where there wasn't really a working class in the sense of working class under industrialization, under capitalism. I mean, there was a peasant class, and there was, like you said, a skilled tradesmen, and merchants were actually considered pretty low, but they were gaining power anyway because they were getting rich off of commerce, regardless of what the social status might, the people might have regarded them socially. I think that's a pretty important part also of actually the rise of capitalism, is how the merchant class was able to go from what's traditionally regarded as a pretty low occupation and up until like people, but they gained a whole lot of wealth and began investing and reinvesting their wealth and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's not that you really had an urban working class. You had rural peasants, which is a very different thing. And I mean, the destruction of the rural peasant life for a ton of people is a huge impetus to all of these later ideas, from communism to really the ideas that we're talking about here. That's life is pretty simple and pretty easygoing for the traditional peasant in the pre-industrial society, which we're never going back to. But that transition into early capitalism and into industrial capitalism, I think, created the need for these ideologies. It created so many problems and contradictions that needed to be addressed. And but yeah, we're talking about a world that's just not comparable to modern class structures and the way modern economies function and the way that society is set up now. And I guess people that were still able to live a sort of peasant life got to live a kind of easygoing, idyllic life. It might be tough seasonally to get the food they need, but there certainly wasn't the land enclosures or anything like that kind of made their lives difficult. But I think this is where you started to see the final stages of the breakdown of the aristocracy and the nobility, and the rise of powerful and moneyed classes of people that didn't at all come from that lineage. And it's really kind of crazy to see the ideas that kind of come out of that to try to bring us into modernity.
Yeah, I would argue that the concept of the modern nation state comes out of this era also. So it's not all,
Well, it comes out of the Treaty of Westphalia
yes,
in
but
16, whenever that was, 47 or something. Yes, I mean that's
the
that
idea of
we
a
run it.
democratic state that is separate from
Mm.
any particular sovereign comes out of the Enlightenment. And so we
Yeah,
just,
some dude,
yeah,
a
yes,
nation state of
separate from
people.
some dude. Yes, the
Yes.
people, capital P, comes out of this era also, and that leads to where we are now. So I'm not. There's not. It's not all great things that come out of classical liberalism. It's not all freedom and ideals and whatever. It had very. I would say that the hyper rational ideals that I wouldn't even say ideal, the hyper rationality of our modern society also comes out of this Enlightenment period.
Okay,
And
okay, but I was listening to some Mises guys recently going on about this, and they do claim, like they claim that Mises Institute is like the big heirs to classical liberalism, and that'd be cool if they were. 'Cause actually, I'm increasingly partial to these guys. Some of them, I mean, some of them, and they in defense of that idea, they really kind of they associated classical liberalism primarily with Locke and then some descendants and on the Bastiat and some of the French liberals in that period in the 19th century. But they really did not. They used a more restrictive definition of the term that didn't include the atheism and rationalism and science focused kind of, the rationalism of in secularism of the French Revolution that culminated in the French Revolution as very high point, and it kind of continued on in various forms. And when you go back to Locke, you're talking about a time before that, and just the idea that like Rousseau and Voltaire really aren't part of that same liberal tradition, that you can't just lump everything in it. And I've also heard, and I'm totally, this goes on along with the nation state point of view, the nation state concept that you mentioned, that the Enlightenment itself, which again, these guys that I was talking about,
well, I would
didn't
say that
associate
go
they
ahead.
didn't associate liberalism with the Enlightenment. They would say the Enlightenment was where really, and I'm totally on board with this idea, is where, if you think about the medieval lifestyle and point of view, where God was removed from societal importance and replaced by the state.
Yes, I will. Okay, so I would call, I would lump at the Enlightenment era and classical liberalism together. I think they're intrinsically linked. And I would also say that this is the era where they sought to unseat God as the arbiter of truth and uh, decided to replace that with rationality. So now the old way, the old world of the aristocracy was the divine right of kings and those appointed by gods to rule over the rest of us because they had, well, they had a whole lot of incest is what they did, but they had the right blood or whatever the thing. They were descendants of those who were appointed by God, and that was the arbiter of truth and authority. So the Enlightenment area sought to replace this with rationality. So now we don't believe in that superstitious nonsense anymore. Is what they were, these brilliant young minds. We don't believe in that superstitious nonsense. We're gonna rule things by appointing people that are by using our rational minds, and we're going to debate and think about these ideas in an open forum and choose, it's the myth of the rational voter. We're going to have democracy and we'll choose the best person for the job and all this kind of idealist nonsense that they thought would be the best. I mean, read fucking Locke's second treatise on government. He goes over this over again and again and again. And so, like, this is how we were going. The best and most proper way to rule was we as a rational society, we're going to choose the people best for the job to rule over or to act on our behalf to protect us in our defense and all this sort of thing. So, I mean, don't ask John Locke what he thought about dancing, but that was that's the classical liberal or Enlightenment milieu. And I'm not the only one to make this argument that the Enlightenment just unseated God and placed rationality as the God head.
I don't know. I've heard the alternate view that I mean, I don't know about Locke in particular, but it is weird to try to lump all of these guys together as being from the Enlightenment and therefore being liberals. I mean, Locke was very focused on, individual rights and natural rights against state power, as saying the individual has primacy over state power, and so many of these other guys coming out of Enlightenment,
no.
absolutely.
I think you have a misunderstanding of Locke. So it's not that, okay. So all of the liberals, including Locke, absolutely believed in individual sovereignty, but they just believed that what I would call the modern nation state is just an extension of that individual sovereignty on the aggregate. This is also Hegel. This is also Fichte. It's all they all thought of the nation state as it's the collective will. Right. So like we are all individually sovereign. So that's why we have the right to vote all together and choose these people to best represent us on the aggregate. That the state was the representation of the people's collective will. And this is absolutely true of the classical liberals. And this goes all the way up to the Hegelians and right into the fucking Nazis. OK, so there's a clear line, a lineage that goes all throughout. It weaves in and out of the theories around the modern nation state. It all stems from this idea.
Sure. I mean, I can see it for somebody in the 17th century to say to come out of monarchy and aristocracy and to say that, hey, maybe this democracy idea is one step better, versus to say that we're still basically operating in that paradigm in 2023.
Oh, these are much more radical and liberatory ideas than what came before them. I will absolutely agree with that. But just all that line of thinking leads to where we are now. And, Michel Foucault makes the argument that you were actually had the potential to be more free under like old despotic kings than under a modern liberal democratic state, mainly because the kings just didn't have the power to execute authority over your fucking day-to-day behavior. They didn't care if you were gay. They didn't care if you were doing drugs. They didn't care about any of that because you had no power. You had no ability to ever be a threat to the king if you were some peasant. And they would put down like violent revolt, but they just didn't care about your day-to-day behavior very much. Because we're all together, we the people in this modern democratic nation state, we all now have a vested interest in whatever. It's horizontal enforcement, right? We all have a vested interest in what other people do with their day-to-day behavior and life and all this sort of thing, because we're all together in this demos. These decisions all affect us on the aggregate. So now we have like this incentive to be really worried about what other people are fucking doing with their own lives or whatever. And Foucault makes an argument that it's worse now you're less free under democracy, just because the ability it creates the state has more resources and it has more ability to enforce these things than say a king or an aristocrat did. And they have more incentives and interest in what you are doing with your life, where it wasn't an issue under the aristocracy. So
Hoppe makes a similar argument. Like Hoppe has whole pamphlets on this where he talks about kind of the natural scholars or the natural elites, you would call them, in that, in having those natural elites. And he's sort of making, I don't want to call it genetic, but he's making, this interesting argument that there are just some people that are just meant to be in charge, and that you would have more freedom under that. Certainly even others beyond Foucault, who I don't know too many that would want to call him libertarian, have taken up this charge, that you're describing, Sec.
Yeah, I don't come at that from a what you would call like a social Darwinist position.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that there are natural elites. You
Right.
might say that there are people that are better at certain skills, and I have no problem with that. That's fine. My
Mm-hmm.
brother
Mm-hmm.
knows way more sports statistics than I will ever know. He just has a natural knack for that. He is an
Mm-hmm.
elite in that sense. Yes,
Right.
that's true. He's better than me in that skill, and there's skills that I'm better than him at, and that's all fine. I'm not saying that there aren't people that are better at certain things. I
Yeah.
just don't think that means you are like some sort of
Yeah.
aristocrat or natural elite. I don't believe that's true because
Yeah.
it's more fluid than that. You have the ability to change that. If I wanted to, I could start studying sports statistics and develop that skill. I just have no interest in that, and he has that natural ability. So I don't think there is a biological or some sort of natural or I don't think there's anything natural about elitism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I hate to revert to my natural tendency of eccentricism. I just in regards to that thing, but like I
The C word.
don't believe that that's true in the same way that maybe someone who really believes in social Darwinism and really believes in like elite power. But I also really don't believe that the opposite is true either. I think there obviously is there is a higher end of the curve for human beings. There's a wide variety of people, and there's also different qualities that people have in different measures. And I just don't think that either direction, either extreme in that regard makes a whole lot of sense. But that's where I am. I lie on the happy middle in between a lot of these pretty extreme ideas.
Yeah, I think it's good that Sec, that you're bringing this up and you're describing, because again, libertarianism today, and not just today, has latched onto that. Like I said, through Hoppe. But I mean, who coined the term social Darwinism? Right? Like,
I believe that comes from Herbert Spencer.
exactly.
Right?
Now,
Yeah.
Herbert Spencer, what's his attachment to libertarianism? The term it existed, but it wasn't used in the way we know it. Murray Rothbard is the guy who came right out and said the first libertarian was Herbert Spencer. You know, like that, like his books were like the first libertarian text, and he referenced them often. So, you know, bringing that up, like, I mean, like even this concept that we have of social Darwinism comes from a guy who is very much appreciated, at least by Rothbard. We're not going to say all of libertarians, but at least by Rothbard. You know, we don't need to get into social statics and all that other crap. Sorry, not crap, but yeah, we don't have to go there. I want to add in, you know, like
I mean, so okay,
ahead.
here's the thing though. We also so from Herbert Spencer we get things like social Darwinism.
Yeah.
But we also get he's also the one that I believe came up with what he called the law of equal freedom, which is a fancy way of saying my right to swing my fist stops at your nose, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is like what you might call a forerunner to like the non-aggression principle or something along those lines. But essentially it means that I have the right to do whatever I want as long as it's not hurting you.
Right.
And so we get that from Spencer. So this is like comes back to kill your fucking heroes, right? I just had this conversation with somebody the other day. It's like I don't find anybody that I agree with like 100% on anything.
Yeah.
Even my own wife, we disagree all the time. So you take even with Herbert Spencer, there's stuff that Herbert Spencer that wrote that I find valuable, and then there's stuff that I'm like, oh, that's a pile of shit. And you just take what you like. Even this goes for Rothbard, Konkin, Carl Hess, pick your Adam Smith.
For sure.
You take what you like and you leave whatever you don't, and you keep fucking moving and you apply it to whatever you think, whatever makes sense to you in your life. And this kind of goes back to equality. Like I'm not for like some there's a false dichotomy that I think is presented.
Yes.
Between sort of what you might call egalitarian, like proponents of equality, and sort of proponents of like natural aristocracy or some sort of vaguely social Darwin. And I don't agree with either of those things. Like, I don't think we might have talked about this before, but I don't think equality is like a thing that can be applied or measured in humans, because we're so vastly fucking different from. That's what makes, like, on my best day, that's what I value about humanity. Is we're so vastly different from each other and have all of our unique qualities and skill sets and fucking beautiful things that we can create, and or whatever the thing, on my bad days, I'm like, we need to nuke the earth from fucking space. But on the good days, I'm like, this is what's beautiful about humanity. It's like we're all very different and unique, and that's fucking beautiful. It keeps it interesting. That's how innovation works. That's how, that's what I like about humanity. So to me, there is no metric that we can use to measure equality, because to me, the older I get, the more I sort of equate equality with like homogeneity or conformity or something along those lines. Like, we have to make all things the same. So then then that's the only way you could form a metric to measure equality, right? Because what do you use? Do you use like wealth? Well, some people don't fucking value wealth. So you're going to put your values and measure, other people's lives against your own values, or, what are we even talking about in terms of equality here? Like voting rights under the law. Okay, sure. But I don't believe there should be law, but if there is law, sure, we should probably have equality under it. That's fine, but it's not something I'm going to strive for. I don't want there to be law. Do you know what I mean? So what are we even talking about?
No, and I'm with you 100%. And I think, you're getting into this is classic Harrison Bergeron, right? Classic Kurt Vonnegut. And part of the problem is, and I there's some things I don't believe in, like a new world, like a singular new world order that's out there. I think there's a lot of groups trying to do a lot of things, engaging in a lot of behavioral science. I think the use of the word equality is one of those instances. That word, much like Ayn Rand would say, get rid of the word we. I think the word equality, now not the word equals, we have to use that in math, but the word equality needs to die. In the Enlightenment, of course, they came up with the term egalitarianism. That is far more specific and is exactly what you're talking about, Sec. Meaning that if there are some kind of norms, then those norms apply, or norms or mores. I'll use the word mores. If there are some kind of mores that exist, then they apply the same to everybody, meaning everybody has the same opportunity, not the same results, but the same opportunity. And that equality should not even be used to describe that. But it is today. And I think that's a problem, because people get confused. They think equality means I should be able to do that too. Or, if this person can jump 20 feet, society should make it so that I can jump 20 feet, or he can only jump as high as I can. Right. Like, because I can only jump 1 foot, whatever that happens to be. So I think using the term egalitarianism would be very helpful in that. And I'm bothered that term's not used today, because that would eliminate this problem, which you're accurately describing is going on, especially online, Sec. Where people are like, oh, we should all be equal, meaning we should all have $100. Like, no. Egalitarianism doesn't say that. Egalitarianism just says, well, we should have the opportunity to make it, but it doesn't mean we're all going to have $100, whatever that happens to be.
This honestly could have and probably should have been like its own topic. I have to think about this all the time. And I don't want to say 100% agree with you in this, but I definitely agree with both of your notions. I think we're all really on the same page here. Of course, I will say, like, the big issue with there's a concept of luck egalitarianism that kind of fixes this, but like the big issue with the egalitarian equality of opportunity is, of course, like it would take a complete totalitarian state that controls every single resource and action that people take to actually give people real, true equality of opportunity. If you took that even close to literally,
right.
But but all things being aside, you can mean something by that. This may be workable. It could be a principle. I'm totally with you on that. And likewise, since, like I said, you guys pretty much covered a lot of bases that I think about these huge dichotomies, these false dichotomies in viewpoints where I tend not to fall, or I fall somewhere in the middle where I'm in a neutral position, because it's just not a dichotomy through which the lens of that dichotomy isn't a lens through which I view the world. Like this whole idea, and this is very along the same lines, this idea of a very Nietzschean kind of, will to power, strength and will in domination versus this very, just to put it in Nietzschean terms, because I don't really have another a way to put this, but in addition to egalitarianism, a very slave morality driven kind of very slave morality driven ethic, which values inverting hierarchies and it values the racial minority, the disabled, on and on and on, the poor over the rich, and trying to invert hierarchies, and trying to really just basically do the opposite of the first one. And it's just like, that's not, the world doesn't work where you sort of assign, that just system of ethics just doesn't mean anything to me. It's so foreign to the way I think and the way I think the world actually functions. And you just kind of run your life along the lines of basically, trying to basically put the weak and oppressed and disabled and ugly above the strong and the beautiful and the rich, or vice versa. It seems so silly to me, but I think a lot of people seem to actually take that philosophy to heart. And actually, there's a lot of political ideas and philosophies that like center those ideas, which is again silly, and is so far into, I think, all of our points of views.
So yes, this is sort of a little side tangent, but I think this is also very linked to classical liberal ideas, the concept of equality, universal suffrage, popular sovereignty, equality. All of these things are very classical liberal ideals, which later libertarianism draws from. And so many people who critique democracy, or I think this is the point I was trying to make earlier. People who critique democracy or equality are often coming at it from like a pro aristocratic or elitist position, and I don't know what the third thing. This is again, we come back to the limitation of language. I don't know what the third thing could be called, because I'm neither of those things. I'm neither pro the ideal of equality, and I'm also not a fan of elitism and aristocracy either.
Yeah.
Is egoism the third thing? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
everyone can be their unique self, and let's forget about these lofty ideals and go from there.
There's two ways of view of that. There's you might come up with a third thing that's a contained philosophy, or like the world basically works in the middle between those things, or you know what I mean? The world doesn't really work according to these extremes. It wouldn't function. These are people that are taking these philosophies and taking them to like their logical extremes. The world wouldn't exist. The world, like basically a Rothbardian view, like egalitarianism, like true egalitarianism, would be a affront to nature, and so would obviously being someone who considers his philosophy the true classical liberalism, so would an absolutist inequality.
So I don't know if what I'm describing is like a center position between these two positions either, because I would like to see sort of both of these concepts destroyed. I don't want to find the sort of the happy medium between these concepts. I want, I want what Deleuze would call, God damn it, not symbiosis. Rhizomatic. I don't want. Oh, really? Wow. Yeah, I don't want equality or egalitarianism, and I don't want natural aristocracy. I want something more distributed or rhizomatic.
I think the union of ego is the answer.
There you go.
That's that. Anytime somebody asks me, all right, so then what does association look like? It's like, well, that's what it looks like. The union of egoists. You come together, and you come together for as long as your goals align, and as soon as they don't align, you go your separate ways. And I understand why some people kind of bristle at that, because part of that is that you just walk away, and there may not be consequences to that, when perhaps some people in their concepts of justice think that there should be. But I do think that that's the only answer I've heard that makes sense for humanity as a social species is ultimately the union of egoists. What do you got, Zach?
No, yeah, I agree with you. Temporary alliance is, but shit, my brain is shitting the bed all of a sudden. I need more coffee or something. But
yeah,
so, is this sufficient? I guess in describing a third position between or apart from this the dichotomy of aristocracy and equality. I think what you say is correct, but possibly insufficient, and maybe we need to somehow expand on that more. But there isn't words to describe what I'm what
Sure.
needs what is more suitable for humans. Like, yes, a union of egoists is a great. What I mean is a union of egoists as a sort of social organizational tool is very valuable, but I don't know that this also describes the state of being that is a lack of this dichotomy between equality and aristocracy. Do you see what I mean? I think there needs to be more expansion or terminology that would better describe this position. It's going back to the serving your unique. Everybody should serve their unique, and equality or aristocracy be damned. I mean, maybe we're going back to egoism again, but I think there is there that hasn't been explored enough. I don't know.
Yeah, rather than point to a specific philosophy or like synthesizing one, I would just say basically like instead of the idea that there's a mix of different extremes. I guess is almost like it's almost tautological to say there's a mix of different extremes, because what are extremes? They're two opposite ends of some kind of spectrum. Yeah, but I'm really not advocating. Maybe I say tongue in cheek that I'm the centrist in this position, but I really do see it as like I don't recognize the spectrum. I don't recognize the spectrum. I'm not on the spectrum. And I'm not just saying that I'm not on the political spectrum. No, political spectrums are dumb. It's because political opinions are multivariate or whatever. There's multiple points that different people believe ideologically. What I'm saying is like I don't really fall on a spectrum of like basically like Nietzschean ethics or slave morality or whatever as I described it, or absolute equality or elitism. I just think that's not, the world doesn't work where you fall on a spectrum in there. Like that's not an organic world. You can't possibly have anything close to either two extreme, because just the world doesn't function correctly that way.
Well, I want to take a little bit. I think the English Civil War is a really interesting place to start. And I want to take a very small historical ride, just a few hundred years before that. Okay. And end up there though, get at why did this thing happen? Like what was going on in Europe at the time that this was even possible to happen. And I think it will help color perhaps what we're trying to come to here, because it will end up in the Enlightenment. So for me, the concept and like bringing up, like I think Penguin actually, the more we've been talking, the more I'm thinking, yeah, Penguin's right. Start with John Locke, right? Now, John Locke is most famous, of course, for his statement. I mean, and like you said, coming out of the Second Treatise of Government, life, liberty, property, right? And I think a lot of libertarians would probably hold that as kind of a defining credo, especially the property part, because they would think that actually colors the previous two, life and liberty. So property, I would argue that concept. Okay, first off, before we had any of these notions of what was being fought for in the English Civil War, say like democracy away from aristocracy. Okay, aristocracy, this isn't, again, we're talking in very broad strokes, so there's nuance in all of this that we're not going to be able to get to because I want to be kind of brief with this. All right, but aristocracy ultimately comes out of the idea that this human being who's in charge, the emperor, the king, the queen, whatever, is the representative for God upon planet Earth. Now, that's a very key point, I think, to get into or to bring up. We don't have to dive on it much, but I mean, just to bring up. So the aristocracy is what's running things. The monarchy, whatever you want to call it, is what's running things for arguably thousands of years. And what I think ends, what really changed, what put an end to, or at least in the human mind, what put an end to the idea of the aristocracy was the Black Plague, at least in Europe. Okay, this isn't even getting into Chinese history or anything like that, whole other ballgame. But in Europe, it comes down to, for me, it comes down to the Black Plague. Now that happened, again, we're talking English Civil War, 17th century. Black Plague happens in the 15th century. There was a plague before that too, but let's stick with this one. And so many millions of people in Europe die from this. They are just gone. And suddenly you have all these empty houses. You have all this shit all over the place that nobody is alive to lay claim to other than the people that are actually alive, which are very few. And out of this, I think, is where, now, like you rightly brought up, the English Civil War is when the concept of title and a lot of all this landed title would become a bigger deal. I think that the Black Plague is when suddenly the normies, the populace, okay, right, the people under the aristocracy suddenly had access to tremendous wealth just by default of the fact that their neighbor died. Suddenly it was like, well, who owns this? Well, I might as well. I'm right here, and that's how that started occurring. So I think that the Lockean concept of property really starts, as in property that could be owned by not the king, it's not the king's deer, really starts in Europe with the Black Plague, when suddenly people realized, hey, I might as well own this because I'm the only person that can protect it, or I'm the closest person, whatever it ends up happening to be. And I mean, the aristocracy at the time can't possibly own it all, or do anything about it all. Kind of like you were talking about how you're better off under the aristocracy because the central point of power is so far away, you can't really do anything about it. Well, that's what was going on during the Black Plague. So this, I think, directly leads to, eventually, you end up with the Dutch Golden Age during the Dutch Republic, right? East India Company, all of this stuff. Getting into, we're going, and how does this happen? It happens over a period of a couple hundred years. Civilization starts, like, these riches are so accessible, the Dutch Republic happens, and it's this area of tremendous freedom. And it's this tremendous freedom because there was that lack of power, part of it even being from the enforcement of the lack of people underneath the aristocracy to take care of everything. Okay, so what ends up happening is you get around, when you get to the 17th century, okay, 300 years or so after the Black Plague, the population starts to normalize in that it starts to reach the levels that it was previous to the Black Plague. But now people are used to, not the aristocracy, everybody, now they're used to owning property. They're used to having a lot, right? They're used to having riches. And of course, this gets on its best display, like I said, in the Dutch Republic at the time during the Dutch Golden Age. And I think a lot of Europe, because I mean, you have the Franco-Dutch War, you have a lot of wars, the 80 Years' War, you have a lot of wars that are going on at this time. And I don't want to get into like a mess of, well, okay, you can only fight so many wars on so many fronts, and that's partly why some of these things happened. I mean, that's certainly a historical adjunct to get into, but we don't have to here. But ultimately, I think what you had was a lot of countries in Europe looking at the Dutch Republic, seeing the tremendous freedom that people had there, and they really did. It was a remarkable time. Even women, had this amazing egalitarianism, and it's all coming out of this Enlightenment thinking, like we're talking about. Not to say there aren't dark elements of the Enlightenment, like we've mentioned, but it's coming out of this Enlightenment thinking. And I think a lot of countries were suddenly like, well, wait, we want to do what the Dutch are doing. This should be like the Netherlands. Let's go, and I could believe that was very responsible for part of the attitudes happening in the English Civil War, in that, and it all, to me, it all stems from the Black Plague, where suddenly the normies, the everyday person, had this notion, holy shit, I can own stuff, and the king doesn't, and that's where, Locke comes in with life, liberty, property at that point. So that's my quick jaunt through history, going just a little bit back, just to explain how did this concept of Lockean property come even to existence? Why wasn't it there before? And it wasn't there before because the everyday person never thought they could have had it until most of the people died in Europe. But what do you got, Penguin?
Yeah, I think Sec is having some computer difficulties, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, well, I was thinking, yeah, just so he might be out for a second, but yeah, I kind of agree, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying about the rise of, well, I didn't use the term, but like the original bourgeois class, which I mean, I kind of just use the term historically to describe, like basically
Sure.
the rise and station of the merchant class or the bourgeois class, and not just strictly merchants. I mean, it's pretty similar. You get people that are accumulating wealth and generating wealth by investing their existing wealth that they've previously generated in tremendous amounts of wealth, yet they're not highborn people, they're not nobility, they're not landed. It's a new
Right.
type of typically, well off, well, endowed with a big house and very large bank account, city dweller in a burger or a bourgeois or a, whatever the other term is, a powerful non-landed men, and they were called that because they were of the cities. Oh, there goes that. All right, they were of the cities, and the landed gentry were basically of the countryside because they had lots of land, which was like arable land to farm, and then lots of peasants to farm it. So that's basically the rise of proto-capitalism. But yeah, I think the idea of like non-landed folks accumulating all this wealth is pretty key. I never really made the connection with the Black Plague or that whole narrative there. I think that could very well have a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I think most countries were terrified, especially at that time. And that would have been right around, because that would have been into the mid 17th century when, the English Civil War happened. I think a lot of Europe was deathly jealous of what was happening in the Dutch Republic, and they wanted a piece of that pie, and they rightly recognized it through the liberalism, the classical liberalism of the time, or the liberalism of the time of the geography of the Dutch Republic itself, in that couple 100-year time frame. So, yeah, again, I think this ultimately points to, I think we have a great definition of libertarianism, but I think the heart of libertarianism comes down to private property, and that's why, again, just to bring it full circle, why Locke is such a great place to really start. And I think we've kind of hit it, and we're describing property a bit. Sec, what do you got?
How terrible do I sound right now?
Not bad.
I'm on my phone. My computer just crashed or something.
Oh, that's all right. Phones actually have great microphones, so you're fine.
Okay.
Let me see. That bad.
Yeah, all of a sudden, my computer just made, I've never seen it do this, but the screen went black, and it made kind of almost like a loading circle in the center of it. I could still hear you guys, but I couldn't do anything about my microphone. And then I finally I tried to do something, but I finally had to shut it off. So we're back to now. I just brought up the link on my phone so I could
right on,
finish this out with you guys. But I can still mostly hear what you guys are saying, though.
Yeah. Well, let's always remember that. Or go ahead, Sec.
No, I do agree that probably the Black Plague and just less population and just a changing of the order of things that was because of the Black Plague probably laid the path, or at least the incentives for the Enlightenment later on, and classical liberalism even, and later on, capitalism and all of these things, just because when you have that many people dying, it's just going to change social dynamics. And yes, just like less people vying for the same amount of resources is going to create less scarcity in some sense. So I do kind of agree with your thesis there. But I think Locke is an obvious start, but I would even going back, I would even start where Locke kind of, the English, this is all the same time period. So the English Civil War going into Locke, this is like the beginning of at least these ideals. But I do agree that the plague actually set the stage for all that to come up later on.
Yeah, and again, I would reiterate, I think the Dutch Republic at the time like really showed everybody that if you have this more laissez-faire attitude, look at the tremendous wealth and advancement that can happen, within your country. And the monarchies didn't want to let go, but the people couldn't help but notice.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of this is, and again, I really do try to like one of the good thing is one of the things I'm really good at in history is actually kind of looking at the broad context instead of the very specifics. I'm not like, I don't know, I'm not walking on encyclopedia, but I try to look at what the broad context of like what life was at a certain time period. But the idea that these people came around, the aristocrats, the nobility, the people with landed titles, they were necessarily very conservative in the basic sense of the word, and of course the religious clergy, which was a distinct class at the time, were necessarily very conservative, just in terms of like society, because they wanted to conserve their power. They didn't want, the idea of like innovation, for example, the word innovation is like a nasty word for both in a religious context and in just in general social context. That's not what you wanted to do. But a certain class of people that were non-landed people that gained their wealth not through inheritance and not through taxing the peasantry or whatever, but and not through like the king's fiat or whatever. The sovereign allows you to extract this much by your name, by your noble birth, but a class of people that gain their wealth through ingenuity and good decision making. Like I said, accumulating the wealth, reinvesting the wealth to make improved means to accumulate more wealth, and just through innovation, ingenuity, planning and long-term thinking, stuff like that, using better accounting methods and so on and so forth, and coming up with early economic ideas to kind of explain these things and transmit these ideas. So that class of people got wealth, therefore they got de facto power, and they just asked the local rulers that were by noble birth. They just said, hey, exempt us from some of these rules and some laws and some of these social strictures. Let us do our own thing separate. These were the early bourgeois, like I was saying. Let us go do our own thing and give us as much freedom as you can. And they generated so much tremendous amounts of wealth and innovation and technology and stuff like that, that it, like you said, it showed the world. I think this happened in like the Dutch. I think this happened in some places with the Italians, or not 100% sure. I think it happened quite all over Europe to some extent, that
Sure.
They were able to create so much wealth for the city, and so much new technologies and social innovation and everything, that it showed that this is this new way of thinking, and not just being conservative, basically trying to just preserve the hierarchies, preserve the orders, not rock the boat, could improve everybody's lives so much, including the rulers that of course take a cut.
Yeah, okay, I want to bring in, and this is another point I wanted to get to as well, and I want to bring this in quickly, because I think this is another essential element of libertarianism, and that is that you can solve anything through logical argumentation. Okay, now that is in itself a key concept, would become a key concept of the Enlightenment. Now, so I want to touch on a little bit on the history of the Enlightenment, because we were doing that earlier as well. History in the sense of its motivations. And that is, the Enlightenment started not because they wanted to get rid of God out of everyday life. It's because they wanted to understand God better. That was the beginnings. That was the original mission, you could argue, of the Enlightenment scientists, from Newton to Whiston to take your pick, whoever, or Thomas Knight, whoever you want to pull out. Okay. However, what ends up happening, arguably, and people can argue, especially when you're looking at, say, the works of Newton and Whiston, but what ends up happening is the Enlightenment thinkers realize, actually, we don't need God. And perhaps there is no God, or if he is, he's the blind watchmaker, he's the absentee landlord, he's this and that, right? So the Enlightenment didn't start off with this quote unquote evil mission of getting rid of God, but it did end off with getting rid of God. Now, Sek was absolutely accurate in saying earlier that what did they do? They replaced it with reason. Reason is that logical argumentation. Okay. And this gets, for me, it is a key part of libertarianism. It's also why libertarianism has never, ever, anywhere, and I say this as somebody who lives in New Hampshire and has for over a decade, where libertarianism is an absolute it's a hot spot, maybe even the hottest spot in the world for libertarianism. Okay, libertarianism has never, ever, ever gained purchase. It has never taken over an area. It has never become the central tenet of an area. It has never become, or the central philosophy of an area. It never has. And the reason that I think that is, and we're kind of carted before the horse here, but the reason I think that is because it does, even though there are a lot of libertarians, including at the Mises Institute, who believe in a God, okay, it's never taken over because it refuses to recognize that aspect of the human condition that it's not possible to logically argument. It's not, language fails. They refuse to accept, though, that language fails. And this gets into, because yes, they wanted to replace, reason with the monarchy. Sorry, got that backwards. Replace the monarchy with reason. They wanted to replace God with reason. And ultimately you're replacing the monarchy, you're replacing God, because again, what is the monarchy? The monarchy is that representative of God upon the earth. Okay. So, this occurs, and it's so funny because really the history of libertarianism is a bunch of thinkers trying to come up with better logical arguments over centuries. Of course, they're always failing, but they're trying all the time. What do you got, Zach?
Yeah, the way you were just describing the replacement of religion with rationality is, it's almost like they're attempting to measure or logically describe God, right? It's the same kind of thing of like trying to measure and logically describe a breeze on a sunny day. You know what I mean? It's like I'm not a believer in a God, but it just, Newton's a prime example of like just trying to measure spirituality it using like mathematics and logical arguments. And I like a lot from Newton, especially his weird alchemist stuff, but he's sort of a prime example of that, of just trying to, we're going to measure and record this and logically describe the spiritual realm, right? When it's the hubris of sort of humanity once again, where it's like, this might not be, like you just said, there might not be words to even describe this. It might not be something that we can obtain through logic and reason. It might be just a fucking feeling, like what is all of this? What is reality? It might be just, there might not be words to describe this because, I don't know. It's not describable. It's something you sense and feel. So
yeah, it's ineffable. Yeah.
Yes. So I think that's, once again, we're taking shits at, logic and reason, but it has its place, but it needs to stay in its place, and it's not the end all be all. And I think that is the worst thing to come out of the Enlightenment is the idea that we can apply, rationalism to literally everything.
Right.
And here we are today, and I think what a lot of people might call the new atheists are, a prime example of just that. And but I think modern libertarianism or current libertarianism falls into that same trap where they try to logic and reason their way through literally everything, and it's not. I think that's why, part of the reason why libertarianism isn't more popular, because for most things nobody cares about your long-winded logical argument about why your theory is logically correct and sound. You know, people, that's not how most people make their decisions. They don't make it on their decisions on pure logic. And I don't think they should either. You know, there's lots of things that go into your decision making aside from logic. You know, it's emotion, it's a feeling, it's, I like the way this smells or tastes. There's you know, just you have a certain way of doing things that works for you, and you don't even know why. You know, your gut just tells you this thing, and maybe you're processing information on a subconscious level and you don't even realize it. You know, there's way more to the human condition than just logic and reason.
Yeah,
I like
go ahead, Penguin.
I like empiricism and reason a lot, and because I like that we can have, you know, planes and trains and automobiles and stuff like that, but you know, that can coexist with coexist with God, with religion, and also with a more nuanced view of the world that's just not based on like pure logic and reason.
Yeah, it only goes so far. You know, it's like classical mechanics and quantum mechanics, right? Okay, classical mechanics can land us on the moon. Awesome, great, that's very useful, but it doesn't explain quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics calls bullshit on some of it. But that doesn't mean it's not useful. And that's the thing. You know, empiricism, the scientific method, all these things, they can be incredibly useful, but they have limits. And that's what we forget. And also, we are not logical beings, you know, just to prove Seth's point. And I think this could play into, I got to wrap things up. But I think this could play into part 2 or part 3 in this history of libertarianism, because I think one of the most important technologies for libertarianism was Facebook. And Facebook itself, you know, calls bullshit on the whole, not on libertarianism, but just on this idea that we're logical beings, because you could explain it. You could get all the evidence in the world, Cambridge Analytica, behavioral experiments that cause suicides for Facebook users. You could explain over the past 10 years, you could give every reason why no one should ever use Facebook. But they still used Facebook so much. You know, I mean, now it's kind of becoming passé, but at the time, people were still using Facebook. Why were they using Facebook? This isn't my words. This is the words of multiple sociologists as well as technologists who this is what they said, not what I'm saying. This is what they said. Okay, but I agree with them. Most people used Facebook because they thought it could get them laid by somebody nearby.
Yeah,
that's why they used Facebook. That's why they wouldn't get off of it. Didn't matter what logical arguments you had. Holy shit, you should never trust this company. Mark Zuckerberg's a piece of shit. Blah, 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 blah. Go down the list of it. Okay. It didn't matter. Why? Because I could get laid. And so.
Yeah. Or just, I like it and it feels good. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean,
it doesn't even need to be any more complex than that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like cat memes is a completely valid reason to do anything.
Right.
But it's not logical, right? It's not logical at all, but that's totally valid. And that's where, in my opinion, libertarianism falls apart, because it says, no, there has to be a quantifiable logical explanation, but there's not. And you can, for some things, for many things, actually, there's not. And
right. Or,
why,
you know, a logical argumentation is only part of it, or it's sort of, it's more often like I find this, like I'll have sort of an instinctual feeling about a thing. And I know this is a big no-no among libertarians, but I will have I don't know. I just don't like fucking war, or I don't like seeing the little guy trampled. But now, you know, as years go on, I still don't like these things, but I have like a dozen logical arguments to support why my ideas and first gut instincts were correct. You know what I mean? But it still stems from this sort of just visceral reaction to certain things. And then later I developed lots of logical arguments as to why, to sort of justify these things, but it sort of comes from the gut first. So like, even though logic was an important part of that, you know, process, it still starts from like just a general feeling about certain things, like a general sense of like injustice or whatever that feeling is. And you know, later on you sort of develop and expand these ideas logically. But I don't know if anybody else, I think I have a funny feeling that's how most people work. You know, they get a vague sense about how they feel about things, and then they find like a breakdown or logical arguments or reasons why they are doing these things. But the first instinct was always like a gut reaction. It was an emotional
for sure.
or something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So, all right. Well, yeah, we should. Okay, listen, we did 2 hours and we barely we got the origins and like a basic working definition of libertarianism. So this might be several episodes, but
you got to bounce anyway.
I think we laid a great framework. This was a great framework for a future conversation on getting to later modern or later early modern history of libertarianism. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think something else that we might need to throw in here for maybe next time is free will versus determinism. I think that might shape the way people think about these concepts. So maybe we should delve into that a little bit more. Maybe next time. But
all right.
Anything else anybody wants to add? I know everybody's got to go, but
yeah, I'll just say very quickly that, I know there's a lot of libertarians and people who I greatly respect, who make the claim that the Enlightenment was never finished. It hadn't been finished yet. And so now libertarianism is here to finish it. I would push back against that, but next time, maybe we can explore more of what that continuance in, say, the 20th century, perhaps, or even earlier, of the Enlightenment. And it's just, because I think we attached it pretty well to libertarianism. Anyway, that's all I've got.
The continuance of the Enlightenment, I say the pinnacle of it was Nazi Germany.
Whoa. Well, there you go. We're going to get into that.
Yeah. I don't think there's any one right theory about these things, but there's some, there's some of these views, like you just said, or like what I was saying about, basically what is and isn't part of the Enlightenment, and what replacing God with the state and everything. I think that's a really cool narrative, and that was a good zinger too. But I think these are really good narratives that we can use, and they're pretty. Some you can come up with some pretty powerful statements out of them, and there's no really right or wrong answer as long as you know enough of the history to be, quoting it accurately.
Right.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Brian, thanks for coming on, dude. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Everybody listening, be excellent to each other. Brian, you want to plug anything you got coming up or stuff?
Just hit sovereigntech.com and lots of good stuff coming down the pike.
All right, dope. All right, you guys, peace. Be good.
Peace.
Peace.
All right, ciao.